welcome back to another edition of Inside the Exit. I'm your host, Drew Brantley, and I'm joined today by Bob Frisch.
Hello, Drew.
Please hit subscribe below. Check out the show notes as well. Let's dig into part 2 of preparing your company to sell, which is all about customers, pipeline, and backlog. So, how do you generate revenue? That's one of the big questions everybody's going to ask any potential buyers looking at. How do you make money? Who are your customers? So let's talk about some of the things that they're going to look at specifically. The first one is, customer concentration and who are your customers. Customer concentration meaning how much of your revenue is generated by specific customers. So oftentimes people want to look at maybe your top 10 customers, or they'll want to see, a list of all your customers depending on your company size. And in general, depending on the size of the company, the less concentration, the better. The risk that people look at when they see customer concentration is a potential buyer says, look, if one customer is 50% of your business and they walk away, then we've lost 50% of the revenue. So that's the risk that buyers are looking at. Now, if you have customer concentration that's above 20, 25%, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. There's a lot of mitigants to it. It could be that you've got long-term contracts. You've got multi-year contracts in place that are 5, 10 years, whatever it might be. Or they've been a customer for 20 years, so you've got a track record of consistently having them as a customer. And so, again, there's a lot of different mitigants around that. But if you do have one customer or more that are providing over, 20% or 25% of the business of your revenue on a regular basis, you need to be ready or prepared to answer why it's not a risk at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's so true. Another example would be if you're in the telecommunications business and you're putting small cells on cell towers or something. Well, let's face it, you don't have many customers. You can't. You got AT&T, you got Verizon, T-Mobile, the others that own these towers and putting out the wireless service going from 4G to 5G, whatever it is. I mean, that's totally understandable that you might have a high concentration with one or all of these 3 or 4 that are the majors in that industry. Same with jet engines, Pratt & Whitney, GE, people like that. Not many people making jet engines, so you might be a part supplier into the jet engine market. But at the end of the day, there are many, many suppliers putting parts into their jet engines, for instance. So this is something that, there are mitigants and things like that, but it is something that you better have an idea of why this is a customer concentration that makes sense, or there's a defensible reason for it that nobody, if that customer just walks away one day, that you're going to lose half your business type of thing.
Yeah, and for a lot of businesses, customer concentration is not an issue because, you've got maybe 100 or 1,000 customers, and so, 1 or 2 people, come or go, it doesn't make a difference. So for some of you, this isn't relevant, but for some of you, it might be. The second thing to look at is the pipeline and backlog. So typically, pipeline is, potential leads that you've got for new customers. A lot of times when people talk about, but it's not committed business yet. Backlog is often defined as business that's already been booked, or contracts that's signed, or revenue that you're going to earn, one way, in whatever way, shape, or form. And so a lot of times people want to look at what is the pipeline and the backlog like. For example, a buyer doesn't want to buy a business where you've done a great job selling for the past 10 years and then all of a sudden you just stop selling when you think you're going to sell the company and all the customers go away because you're not actively promoting it. And so people want to know that, okay, the company's continuing to grow. So as you look at that pipeline, think about what does the pipeline look like of potential customers, and what can you do to continue to expand and also track that information. If you're thinking, whether you're thinking about selling or not, the more you can do to begin to track the leads that you have for potential business, the better, because if you do decide to tell, that data over a long period of time, especially the last 3 to 5 years, is going to be really important. Then the backlog, looking at what information do you have or what contracts do you have and customers you have in place that you know you're going to get money from, in the next year or already in place. Maybe it's over multiple years. Then also within backlog, looking at what is your historical backlog looked like versus the actual revenue generated. Because as many of us know, just because you sign a contract with somebody at the end of the day doesn't mean you always get paid for that. So sometimes that's, people are going to want to look historically at what does the backlog historically look like compared to the revenue. So did you make what you said you were going to make from a revenue perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And the pipeline itself, we got a lot of buyers that we've even worked with where they want to know what percentage of the pipeline is going to result in backlog and or business for the company. When it's nice to have a pipeline. Are these just customers that you called up and said hello to and maybe they'll give you business? Or are these real customers that you might have dealt with in the past that they have a big project coming up that you're probably going to get a piece of that business? Or are these new customers that have told you they're going to give you business over the next year or whatever? So they're going to want to know how realistic is that pipeline? Is it a realistic pipeline that you've developed, and how have you developed it, and what are the percentages and the odds? Then in the backlog, how long does it take that backlog to move through and become sales? Can a contract be canceled? All these things about that backlog. So there are questions behind the questions of what is the backlog, what is the pipeline, then what is the value of it? What is the reality of it is the best way I can put it, of the backlog or the pipeline.
Absolutely. And every business and industry is different in terms of who your customers are, how you get them, and how long you keep them. Some businesses have a lot of repeat customers. You know who your customers are. Personally, I've got a business that works with the government, so technically we have one customer, which is the Department of Defense, and that's it. So we have 100% customer concentration with the Department of Defense. We're okay with that. Okay, other businesses, you've got a lot of different customers. They come from different places. But one of the things they're going to look at is how long have those people been customers? So, if you do have repeat business, do you keep your customers for a long time? Or is maybe your industry is something where, nobody keeps customers for any period of time and there's a reason for it. In general, if you don't keep customers for a period of time, be prepared to explain why that's not an issue, because a lot of times buyers like to see that there's customer retention. You're able to keep business over an extended period of time. It's okay if it changes, and it's always going to, many times it's going to fluctuate, how much revenue you get from a specific customer each year. Maybe it doesn't, but a lot of times for many companies it does. So that's okay. But just think about, how do I get my customers, and be prepared to talk about how long you've had them, what your industry's like, those types of questions. And also, how easy is it for them to move to another competitor of yours? That's a big thing people look at, is how easy is it for a customer to leave. The more sticky they are, meaning the harder it is for them to leave, oftentimes the better in a buyer's eye.
Yeah, and a lot of companies that we work with are project-based. So they may have and they're involved in the project, or about to be, it's in the pipeline or it's in the backlog, but they know there's going to be a lot of additional business on top of whatever it is that they bid on and won that project. So that's an important thing that you need to have your hands around, that this is, and it's more than just saying we know there's going to be additional business. That's nice, but you don't get any credit for that. I mean, that's nice, but at the end of the day, but if you really have some statistics that can back it up with that customer or those types of projects and things like that, that's where your valuation and the value of your company gets even better.
Absolutely. Well, guys, so again, to summarize what we've talked about here today, we're really talking about customers, how we generate revenue, pipeline, and backlog. So make sure you got a handle on who your customers are, how sticky they are, what that looks like historically for your company. What does the pipeline look like? Where are my leads coming from? How consistently are we converting those? What do those numbers look like? And then also, what's the backlog? Meaning, what's the business you know you're going to have, and how has that looked historically, and how have you been able to convert that to revenue historically and also going forward in the future?
Yeah, and one final point. A lot of you know your customers better than your customers know your customers. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but it's true. You know your customers better. And they may be working on a new project for one of their customers that you know you're going to have 30% of that business. You just know it. And you know how well that project is going for them and this and that. That's an important thing to know, an important thing to try as best as you can to bracket that, to know what that value is, to put a number as best you can. But really, that's backlog on top of backlog type of thing. Well, yeah, there's a project that's being worked on for a new piece to a jet engine, let's say, or a new jet engine itself, that you know your brackets, let's say you do brackets, or whatever you do, that metal piece that you form for that jet engine, and this whole new project is coming down and you're going to have a major portion. Think about that. All those types of things go into this backlog pipeline, customers, and revenue generation.
I want to mention one other thing. You said one final thought. I got another final thought. We've talked about this. If you haven't watched the video on preparing your company for sale, talking the first edition, looking at management and employees, go watch that video, because one of the things we talk about in there is key man risk and kind of who owns the relationships with the customers. So since we're talking about customers, it is important to realize that, you know, if one or two people in your organizations, especially if it's you and you want to leave, if you have the relationships with the sellers, with the customers of your business, that's going to be a potential issue for a buyer, because if you leave, then there's the potential for those customers to go. So the more you can distribute those relationships to other employees in your organization, the better. So on the topic of customers, who owns those relationships? And if it's you and you're leaving, how can you distribute them to other people? With that being said, please check out our other videos. If you have more questions about this specifically to your company, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help you. Look forward to checking you out or seeing you watch the next video. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.